Are any of us really in healthy relationships? So many of us have been married for decades and brushed so much of our problems under the carpet. So today I have Kevin Nahai, who is a relationship expert, a life coach, and a therapist to talk to us about little tips and tweaks that we can do in our own relationships to live healthier, better lives. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Shirin, for having me. I'm very grateful.
I've read the testimonials about you. You've changed people's lives. I mean, you've done such good for people. You do couples therapy, you see young adults. But the one thing you said to me that I thought was so interesting before we started was how you really are suggesting that young couples who are starting in relationships now go to therapy before marriage.
Yes. So one thing that I always say to young people is that the best time to work on your marriage is before you are in one. And the reason is that you don't wait until you're in a car accident to get auto insurance. You get auto insurance before you get into the accident. By the time the accident has happened, the auto insurance can't retroactively help you. So if you're experiencing issues in your marriage, then yes, by all means, go to couples counseling. But what you're going to find is that you have sometimes several months or years or decades of issues that have been swept under the rug. And before you can work on the manifestations or the symptoms of those issues, now you have to pull it up from under the rug and address these underlying issues. So people think that this is very intense, but I tell couples, you've been dating 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, everything's great, you're in the honeymoon phase, go to a couples counselor. And they say, well, why would I go to a couples counselor when there are no issues? And it's precisely the time to go to couples counseling when there are no issues, because at that time, your mind is less clouded by anxiety, by fears, by fighting, by contempt, right? At that time, your mind is in the headspace of, I want to continue having a great relationship. So this is not to say that if you're having an issue in your marriage or your relationship, it's too late. It's never too late. But for your younger audience, I would say start by doing individual therapy or counseling. And if you're in a relationship, start doing that before you get married.
I think that's just going to be so helpful. I mean, in my generation, we never talked about that. I've been married over 20 years. To think about doing couples therapy before marriage, it would be unheard of.
Right.
And even once you're in marriage, it was like, no, make it work. Everything's going to be okay. But now we're seeing so many issues, decades of marriage later, and there are major issues because they were never addressed. So many of my friends will complain that their husbands, for example, smoke weed in order to deal with their own anxiety and their own issues. And every time they try and tell their husband, therapy, let's go, let's fix this, it's just like, no, I'm fine. You don't know what you're talking about. And it causes a lot of issues. What is your advice to women who are in these relationships? How do they approach their husbands? How do they talk to them about these issues?
So as we were talking about off air a moment ago, a lot of the time people think that if they withhold sex, or if they become cold or withdrawn, or if they make some sort of threat, then that's going to get their husband to change. And it's not. That's just playing a game, which then creates division. And in relationships, if you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, right? So I'm not a fan of making ultimatums or making threats, especially if you're dealing with a stubborn type of man. If you're dealing with a man who thinks, it's his way or the highway, things of that nature. The more you dig your heels in, the more he's going to dig his heels in, right? But I think that taking a roundabout approach is what I have found to be most helpful. And what I mean is that if you can have one of his male friends or an uncle, or if you can somehow get him to go have a conversation with a therapist, just have him go walk, around the block with somebody, and have him hear it from somebody who is not his wife, so that he doesn't feel like his wife is nagging him or telling him what to do, then that is something that can often be very effective. Have a third party try to have that conversation with him and try to come at him from a different angle. But I would say that you want to prevent this situation if at all possible. And I mean, prevention is the whole game, right?
Right.
Once you are in the situation, you know, there are different solutions. I have wives calling me all the time about this particular issue. And depending on who the husband is and what his issue is, and, you know, is he a great husband, but he just smokes weed? Is he not such a good husband and he has major anger issues, or he has addiction issues? These variables kind of change what the right approach is. But if you can prevent this from happening in the first place, it's really about making sure that issues are not being swept under the rug, and making sure that you both are meeting each other's needs. So one thing that I always suggest for every couple, whether they're newly together or they're married, and this is such a simple fix, but no one does it. Maybe you do it because I know how close you and Paymon are, and how much effort you put into your relationship. Once a week, every couple should sit down for 60 to 90 minutes, and they should ask each other, what am I doing well? What am I doing poorly? What do you need from me? What would you like me to do more of? What would you like me to do less of? Are we showing up for each other enough? And if you sit down in that vulnerable way, you have the opportunity to say to your husband, listen, I can't change you, I can't control you, but what you're doing is really, really bothersome to me. And you'd be surprised. He might say to you, well, I smoke weed and I deal with my anxiety that way because I feel like you're not giving me enough attention, or I feel like you're too busy with the kids or too busy with your career, right? If you can access the person's softer side by approaching them more softly, you'd be surprised what type of information comes out of those conversations.
Wow, I love that. I think that is such sound advice to sit once a week, you know, for 60 to 90 minutes and do that, because then you're not attacking each other. You're speaking and you're vulnerable and you're opening up and you're hearing from one another.
Yes.
You know, so many times in relationships, when you have several children and you've been married for a while, you kind of become, you know, roommates rather than partners in a relationship. And the lust and the love starts to wane off because you're kind of just passing each other in the hallway, and there's errands and there's things to get done, and you lose sight. But if you meet once a week for an hour, all of that connection can come back because
Yes.
you're communicating again.
Yes. So a few hacks. One, the 60 to 90 minute conversation. Huge. Two, every single time you're with your partner, sitting face to face, both of your phones should be away. It's not only about being present and being respectful, it's also about sub-communicating to your partner that in this moment, you are my priority. And the third thing that I always recommend is every single day, morning and evening, when your husband or your wife leaves the house, you walk them to the door. When they come home, you greet them at the door. Greeting and leaving with enthusiasm and with love gives the other person a feeling of safety and a feeling of being respected and admired. What happens when you've been married for years and years is it's like, I need your help, pack the lunch, send the kids off to school. I mean, I don't even have kids, but these are just things I've observed, right? And you and your husband suddenly, like you said, became roommates, and you become disconnected.
Correct.
And this is why they say, like, when dad comes home from work, first you go hug and kiss your wife, then you become a human monkey with your kids and play with them, right?
Right.
So I think that as people progress through the natural evolution of a relationship, engagement, marriage, house, kids, they lose the connection and they lose the prioritization of the partnership. Most relationships, Shirin, don't die because of infidelity, because of lying, because of abusive behavior. All those things happen 10% of the time, right? God willing, nobody ever has to experience that. But the vast, vast majority of relationships die because of neglect, because of a lack of daily watering of the plants. So I always say, like, everybody's running around talking about how they want to get married and they want to have a partner and stuff like that. But if you really mean that, there is an additional level of responsibility that you have to be willing to adopt. It's kind of like saying that for the rest of my life, I'm willing to go to the gym for 3 hours a day, right? If I told you you have to go to the gym for 3 hours a day for the rest of your life, suddenly you're like, oh, like that sounds like a lot, right? Obviously, there's a benefit that you get in return, but we have to work really hard to find the right relationship, and then we have to work even harder to maintain that relationship.
I think that's the key, is that you find it. It's great for a couple of years, and then you're like, okay, we're good, we're happy, so you neglect. And that is the key right there, is that neglect is what makes everything fall apart. And I'm seeing, like, now, as I have older kids, right? So, I mean, they're not ready to get married now, but they will in a few years. And I talk to my older friends whose kids are now at the age of engagement. Like, you know, you're at that stage of your life, and it just seems like men are not engaging and not as chivalrous to women as it used to be. And women are like, what are we supposed to do here? And there's something about old school chivalry that is so beautiful, and it's dead. And what is your advice to young couples, to young men now? How are we going to bring those relationships back? Like you said, a woman or a man should greet their husband or wife when they come in the door. That is so important, right?
Yes.
But all of that seems now like ancient and old school, and people are not willing to do that. They're like, why should I go greet them at the door?
Right.
Or why should I call? Or why should I open the door? We're in a modern day. It's 2024, you know? Now, what's your advice?
Okay, so this is a fundamental issue, and you know, you can say that this started in the 1960s with like the women's liberation movement, or you can say that, you know, this got worse with the advent of social media, everybody giving their advice when they have no idea what they're talking about. But whatever the origins are, we have arrived at a point in modern society where both men and women think that they are the prize, right? You listen to a certain YouTube channel, it's a guy talking about how you're the prize, you have to have the power, you have to have the upper hand. If you listen to another YouTube channel or your grandmother, she's going to tell you, your husband should always love you more than you love him. You're the prize. You should be on the pedestal. All of this is nonsense. The relationship is the prize. So what both men and women have to understand is that you can either be right or you can be at peace. You can either be right or you can have a good relationship. So what are the key ingredients to making a good relationship? Trust, honesty, respect, etc.
Right.
The biggest one is humility and the willingness to change yourself, right? Our ego and our pride makes us think, oh, I'm not going to do this for her. She has to chase me. Or, I'm not going to text him first. He should text me. I'm not that type of girl, right? That's your ego, and that's your pride preventing you from creating a connection, right? So basically what happened is that men, unfortunately, who are not thinking consciously and don't have a lot of emotional sophistication, are running around, sleeping around with whoever they want, treating girls like trash, having one-night stands. We know that, unfortunately, that's a tale as old as time itself. In response to that, women said, fine, you want to behave badly? I'm going to behave badly too. And women started to do the same thing. And now we have both men and women behaving poorly. Instead, what we should have done is we should have said to the men, no, it's not right that you're behaving this way. You should clean up your behavior, right? And we should say to the women, these more traditional values of being careful who you sleep with, protecting your energy, protecting your time is a good thing to hold on to. I'm not saying that everybody has to be a virgin until they're married or anything like that, right? But what I'm saying that this ego that everybody has, that they can do whatever they want because the other person does it, is just so wrong.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for disaster. So, they say like, you're not supposed to change your partner. Like, you should never be in a relationship where you have to change someone. That's also nonsense. You shouldn't change who they are at their core, but the one constant you can expect in a long-term relationship, you know this better than I do, is changing yourself over and over and over again. And if your husband or wife thinks that they can continue doing what they've always done, they can say, this is who I am, I'm not going to change, then you've got to, you have to reevaluate whether that relationship is viable. Because if you don't have that willingness to change yourself over and over again, or if you're too afraid to ask your partner to make changes for the sake of the relationship, then it's not going to end well.
No, it's not. I mean, we're constantly evolving, and the whole purpose of us being on this earth is to grow and learn and change, right? That is the whole purpose of all of this. And I know that you see, hundreds of clients, and you've been a life coach, and you're in therapy, and you've seen all different types, long-term relationships, new relationships, singles. If there's one bit of advice that you want to give to people watching right now about one thing that everyone should be doing in their relationship today to preserve a healthy, good relationship, if you can look into that camera and tell us your one hack, your one piece of advice, what would it be?
Okay, my one piece of advice above all is that if you want to have a successful relationship, you must possess self-awareness. Whether that entails going to therapy, hiring a coach, reading more books, watching more YouTube videos, talking to your partner about what your flaws and defects are, you must be aware of why you act the way you act, why you think the way you think, what your triggers are, and then you must be willing to change those things. And I always say, there's a difference between changing who you are at your core and changing your behavior. You don't have to change the things that make you beautiful and lovable at your core, but you do have to be willing to change your behaviors over and over again to compromise and to create a healthy and lasting relationship.
I just want to say what you just said right now is so incredibly important, because you're not changing who you are. You're an absolutely incredible creature and human being, but changing your behavior in order to sustain a healthy relationship is extremely important.
Absolutely.
So thank you for saying that. Like, that should be a billboard, all over for everyone to understand that it's not a personal thing about you. You're incredible, right? But your behavior and what you're doing is not just hurting everyone around you, but it's hurting yourself too.
Yes. And people often conflate changing who they are with changing their behavior, right? It's like, if you're an introvert, or if you really love your family, or if you have conservative values, I'm not asking you to change those things, because those things are parts of your personality that have been shaped over your whole lifetime. And I should fall in love with those things. Those are core characteristics that should entice me to be with you in the first place. But if you have a bad temper, that's a behavior. If you stonewall or you shut down, that's a behavior. If you're bad at responding to texts, that's a behavior, right? So just because somebody asks you to change a behavior doesn't mean that they are now trying to come in and control you. And we can preempt this by your having self-awareness about your own behaviors, right? So if I can look within and know, here is my characteristics, here are my good behaviors, here are my bad behaviors, and if you can possess that self-awareness as well, then we don't have to fight each other about it, because we're both coming to the table with that knowledge. One other thing that I would say to old people, young people, married people, single people, every person across the board, the reason that I got into this line of work is that the quality of our lives is the quality of our relationships. Human beings are born and bred to attach. Being dependent emotionally on another human being is not a preference. It's not a choice. It's not an option. It is a physiological, biological, emotional necessity, which means that if your relationship house is out of order, it's going to be very, very hard to feel at peace. Even if your career is going great, even if your friends are going great, right? There's something about the need for having a peaceful, happy, successful relationship that we cannot escape. So all of this nonsense on the internet about how like you should be 100% on your own and, you know, you don't need a person and be your own this and that, it just flies in the face of evolutionary psychology. So wherever you are, if you're young, if you're old, if you're single, if you're married, if you're feeling that something in your relationship house is out of order, get some help on that, and I guarantee you that a rising boat lifts all tides.
Oh, I love that, Kevin. That is spot on. You are incredible. Thank you for doing what you're doing, because relationships definitely are the most important things in our lives. So continue to help beautiful young couples and people find their voice and ways to communicate. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. You can reach out to Kevin Nahai. He's tagged here below. If you need anything, DM him, make an appointment, go see him. The most important thing in our life is our relationship. So I hope you got some great little hacks today, and we'll see you all next time.